She said it came back on during the prayer, so it might be okay. If it's glitchy, those who are watching online, please let us know. If we need to pause and reboot again, we'll try to do that. But we'll go ahead and just begin reading chapter 9. We're going to read verses 1 through 7 and make some comments on that. And keep in mind, this is right after the flood. This is right after getting off the ark, where Noah and his family had been in the boat for a little over a year. They finally get off, let everything out. Noah builds an altar and offers sacrifices to God, and we roll into chapter 9. Again, God makes a promise to him as well that in verse 22 of chapter 8 says, "While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease." So that is the promise that God made to Noah and basically to us there. And in chapter 9, we're also going to read about some of his promises that he has for us as well, or tokens of his existing promise. So verses 1 through 7. "And God blessed Noah and his sons and said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every fowl of the air, upon all that moveth upon the earth, upon all the fishes of the sea. Into your hands are they delivered. Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you, even as a green herb have I given you all things. But the flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall ye not eat. And surely your blood of your lives will I require. At the hand of every beast will I require it, and at the hand of man, and at the hand of every man's brother will I require the life of a man. Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God made he man. And you be fruitful and multiply and bring forth abundantly in the earth, and multiply therein." So again, chapter 9 kind of begins some of the similar language as we saw right at the very beginning, right? When God was talking to Adam and Eve, go out, be fruitful and multiply. Basically, it's the same situation, right? Adam and Eve started beginning of creation, and their job was to, it says, the King James reads, replenish. The better translation of that word would be to fill, at least especially in Adam and Eve's case. He uses that same word, replenish, but it was starting from the very beginning. So replenish does this kind of the wrong connotation. Fill would be the better word there. Now in Noah's case, replenish actually makes sense, right? Because that's what they're doing. But again, the word actually means fill at the base of it. So he's telling them to go out and fill the earth. Then we had in verse 2, the idea of the dread of man being on the animal kingdom, if you will. Going back to, again, Adam and Eve in chapter 2, verse 29. You just want to turn back a few pages and look at that. I'm sorry, not 29. It can't be 29. There's not 29 verses. Let's see here. Oh, man. Chapter 129. I got to correct that in my notes, otherwise I'll fix that later. In Genesis chapter 129, it says, "And God said, Behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed which is upon the face of the earth, and every tree in which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed, and it shall be for you for meat." From that, when we were talking back there in chapter 1, we took the idea that they were vegetarians, right? That's what they had. And so the dread of of man on the animal kingdom wasn't there. Again, you have Eve talking with a snake, right? They weren't eating them, and again, I'm not saying they were talking to the rest of them, but the natural dread or fear that animals have of humans wasn't there. Coming off the ark, God says, now, you don't only have to eat the trees and the vegetables and all that stuff, every green thing. You can eat the animals. Now the animals fear man, because man's looking towards them as food. Again, just an interesting thing, and nothing that really make any significance, other than people sometimes, you'll hear people in this modern day appeal to spirituality, sometimes the Bible, which they don't appeal to the Bible much, as trying to verify or affirm that go and eat. And so that is what one of the things we can, that's not of great significance, but something we can draw from that. He then makes some clarifications of that, though. This new rule they can eat the animals, he puts a stipulation on it, verse 4. But flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall ye not eat. Now, when I first read that, I'm just trying to think of how that would work practically. I know whenever you butcher an animal that you do bleed it, but you don't get all the blood out. There's some residual blood. I don't think that's what God was getting at, that it had to be completely blood-free. I think as you go on and you read some other comments, the idea of eating blood itself. Because, again, God is making blood special. He says that's where the life is. Again, way before modern-day science came around and explained that blood was the critical component of life. You even think about, if you've studied some history, not too recent history, where for ailments, people used to bleed people, take blood off of them. They thought that would help them fix their issues. That's almost exactly the opposite of what you need to do. The life is in the blood. So God is nothing is this that God says or does is without significance. And here what we're going to learn, the specialness of blood, the life being in the blood is the point that God's making. And if you doesn't take too much of a leap to look down to his son, when his son was going to shed his blood for each and every one of us, his son shedding his physical blood for us gave us the opportunity to have spiritual life. And I'm sure that's the groundwork that God is laying here with this Old Testament law. Again, they could not eat an animal or eat the blood of an animal. Let's turn over and actually read a couple of other passages that talk about this. Turn over to Leviticus chapter 17. Leviticus chapter 17, we're going to read a few verses here, starting in verse 10. Again, talking about this law, which was given at the patriarchal time, the reading in Genesis, being codified in the Mosaical law in Leviticus. In verse 10 it says, And whatsoever man there be of the house of Israel, or of the strangers that sojourn among you, that eateth any manner of blood, I will even set my face against that soul that eateth blood, and cut him off from among the people. Continuing on to verse 11. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make an atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that maketh an atonement for the soul. Again, you see the groundwork that God is laying, talking about what Christ was going to do when he shed his blood for us. That was what he was going to use to make an atonement for us. And then dropping down to verse 14, Leviticus chapter 17, it says, For it is the life of all flesh, and the blood of it is for life thereof. Therefore I said unto the children of Israel, You shall eat the blood of no manner of flesh, for the life of all flesh is in the blood thereof. Whosoever eateth it shall be cut off. So again, God's making a rule. Again, if you were back there in Noah's time, it might seem kind of arbitrary. You know why? But God is laying groundwork for a concept to be understood. So when Christ was going to come and shed his blood for us, that we can make a connection of spiritual life being given by that act. Does that make sense? Yeah, sure, why not? It's kind of not the most direct route, but it's there, right?
And how the priests treated it, the priests were treated special.
Yeah, they did. So remember, they took the blood out whenever they did sacrifice the animals. They talked about, and we talked about this in our studies of the Old Testament. They had the massive sacrifices in the daytime where these thousands of animals. They dug ditches and actually drained the blood off and offered the animal for a sacrifice. Again, treating the blood as something separate, distinct from the animal sacrifice itself. But again, without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sins, we're told. And again, God is just showing that blood is something that's special, that should not be treated as common. It's where life comes from. Going on to verse 6, it says, that whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God made he him. So in a very simple thing, if you had to paraphrase verse 6, what is verse 6 authorizing?
Someone who has built up capital.
capital punishment. If you want that, you're exactly right, but if you just want to summarize this, talking about capital punishment. Again, we have a big movement today where people want to abolish capital punishment. They say it doesn't have any deterrent. I disagree. I mean, again, the beautiful part of the United States is every state can set their own rules, supposedly, without the federal government overreaching too much. That was the design originally. And if you want to go live in a state without capital punishment, have at it. If you want to go live in a state where they're defunding the police, have at it. I want to live in a state where there's a strong police force that's going to punish the evildoer, even to the point of taking their life. When punishment is done correctly, it is a deterrent. Now, you could argue the way we implement capital punishment, with going on death row for 20 years and 8,000 appeals, that it's not much of a deterrent. But still, they're basically saying, if you take a person's life under the right circumstances, we are going to take yours. And that is God ordained. Now, people might not like that in this modern day, but oh well. God says, you don't kill man. And he gives a reason for it. Why is it so wrong to kill another man?
We were created in his image.
We are created in his image. So to kill another man is to kill something made in the image of God. And God said there's no toleration for that. There's no sympathy for that. Again, so people, in this first 7 verses, you find people who are on the wrong side of the fence and along think, oh, I'm going to be a vegetarian because the Bible says all life is precious. Well, that's wrong. Animal life, God says you're going to kill and eat. Oh, we're going to abolish capital punishment because that's wrong. We're not going to kill anybody. Again, that's wrong again. If that person has done something to deserve capital punishment, namely killing another man, God authorized, God sanctioned. There's no way around that. And then in our first reading, first 7 verses, again, he gives a saying in verse 7, be fruitful, multiply, bring forth abundantly in the earth, and multiply therein. So God is giving the command that go out and fill the earth. And it would have been the command not only to Noah and his family, who was starting ahead of the game from Adam and Eve, but also to the animals, right? Go out and fill the earth, especially the land-bearing animals. So the first 7 verses there, any questions, anything on that? All good on that for our local audience? All right, we're going to do the next big section in the middle here, verses 8 through 17. So we're going to read again. And God spake unto Noah and to his sons with him, saying, and I, behold, I have established my covenant with you, and with your seed after you, and with every living creature that is with you, of the fowl, the cattle, of every beast of the earth with you, from all that go out of the ark, to every beast of the earth. And I will establish my covenant with you, neither shall all flesh be cut off any more by the waters of a flood, neither shall there any more be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, this is the token of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations. I do set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a token of a covenant between me and the earth. And it shall come to pass that when I bring a cloud over the earth, that the bow shall be seen in the cloud. Now remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and that the waters shall no more become a flood to destroy all flesh. And the bow shall be in the cloud. And I will look upon it, and I will remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is upon the earth. And God said to Noah, this is a token of the covenant, which I have established between me and all flesh that is upon the earth. So here's a relatively lengthy reading in the middle of this chapter that's really just talking about one thing. And what is it talking about? Rainbow. God's promise that he will not destroy the earth ever again with a worldwide flood. Period. Now, is God going to destroy the earth at some point in the future? Yes, he is. And what does the Bible indicate? How is God going to destroy it then, as opposed to what do you get here in Genesis? Fire. It's going to be burned up. It's going to be dissolved. So again, God is promising mankind, I'm not going to do this. Now, a lot of things that God does, and a lot of language that God uses, he's using it in a way so we can try to understand God. Does God need something in the sky to remind him of a promise he made to Noah? No, he does not. But again, God has to personify himself, give himself some human traits, so that we can understand God a little bit, because we are humans. So it helps our understanding of a spiritual being. So he talks about the rainbow and the clouds. What does that indicate before the flood about the existence of a rainbow? Yeah, it wasn't there. Because if it would have been there before, and God had said that, it'd been like, rainbow's always been here. You know, that's not a token of this new promise. So again, we talked a little bit about this idea before when we talked about the waters and the firmament, the waters above the firmament, the waters below the firmament in the first part of Genesis. The idea that people, they say it like the canopy theory, that there was water, a heavy water layer around the earth prior to the flood. Because the flood, again, not only originated with rain, but the waters, the fountains of the deep being broken up, water coming from different places. Don't know for sure, but again, rainbows occur because of light refracting through a cloud. That's why they occur naturally. Again, he says it here, whenever a cloud passes over the earth, the sunlight hits it a certain way, you see a rainbow. It's about light refraction. If that wasn't happening before the flood, that means a couple of things naturally. Either there wasn't clouds, or there was something in the atmosphere that was thick enough or dampening enough that it would mess with light refraction. Again, this doesn't really mean anything to me. It's just interesting. It's science, right? It's fascinating. But after the flood, something changed. Something changed in the earth. Something changed in the atmosphere that allowed the rainbow to be seen. And so, again, does it matter to salvation? Does it matter? It's an opinion. No, it doesn't matter at all. Again, just fascinating things that give some indication of how the earth was before and after the flood. To me, it's interesting anyway. So God creates it. Now, from man's perspective, would the rainbow have been comforting? I mean, people see them now, they're beautiful, right? People post pictures and stuff, oh, they're beautiful. But if you had never seen rain before, and you'd just gone through this year boat ride after experiencing a worldwide flood, and here a week later it starts raining again, and maybe it's relatively hard, could a little panic probably start setting in? You start breathing a little hard, saying like, here we go again, possibly. But all of a sudden you see the rainbow and you're like, oh yeah, remember what God said. He's not going to do anything to destroy this earth in that way ever again. Goes back to, again, in the verse, chapter 8, verse 22. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. So again, even to this day, and if we're right on our timelines, we talked about last week as well, this is around, just using round numbers. I know I confused some people last week, and I apologize when I was throwing out some years. People are used to thinking about times in BC. I was actually starting from Adam and Eve and going forward. So we're about 1,500 years-ish, into mankind's existence at the time of Noah, roughly 15, 16, somewhere in there. So if we're correct about where we are now, this is general, we're several thousand years down the road. We're a couple of thousand since the time of Christ. Going back even further from Christ, we're probably about 4,000 years before Christ when this event happened. So, is that right? All right. 2, 6. Maybe it's only 4. But anyway, let's just say several thousand years. It's 4,000. I think it's closer to right. So for 4,000 years, God has kept His promise. We take comfort from that. Does God keep promises when He makes them to us? Yes, He does. Mankind is the one that breaks the promises. God doesn't break the promises to us. It's not how it works. Like I said, there's not much more in that section that I saw. Does anybody else see anything in that section? Bill, do you have something?
Yeah, just from a standpoint, when he does talk about, when he brings the cloud, he talks about when I bring the cloud on the earth, and remembering, like you were saying, the personifying, not that he would have forgotten, but it's a continual. The thing I was wanting to point out is look at how plugged in, I guess we would say today or something. He's not off sleeping somewhere. He's not disconnected. He is ever active, ever present. And so when we look at that and where we sit today, while we don't have him speaking directly to us anymore, intentional, part of the plan, through his word, he speaks to us. But it is, for me, looking at things like this, 1,500 years after, after Adam and Eve, or the garden began, he's still active, he's still very aware. It's not that because somebody doesn't hear from him for a while doesn't mean that he's not active and present.
Right. Again, because we're dealing with such a smaller, even though mankind's time at this time was much longer, thousands of years at a pop, or close to 1,000 years, it gets brought down to 120, say we're still living for several hundred years, and even to our time, 10, if by manner of strength, 40, talking about 70, 80 years. We might not say, in those blips of human lifetimes, might not look like nothing's going on. But again, time is nothing to God. God is working out his plan, working out what he needs to have done. And people, again, from our perspective, might say, oh, God is, the crazy saying God is dead, or God's not active, or God's not here. Where are his promises of this coming destruction? It's been the same from the beginning. God is active, and God is, like the word you use, omnipresent, a characteristic of God. He is always there, and he is working out his will. Even though that we're only here for a short time, might not be able to see it, in no way can see it fully. But don't be deluded into thinking that he is not around and doing what he wants to accomplish, even in the present day. The only other thing I noticed there, talking about the rainbow in the book of Revelation, chapter 4, verse 3, when it's talking about the throne in heaven, again, chapter 4, verse 3, it says this, and he that sat was to look upon like a jasper and a sardine stone. And there was a rainbow round about the throne, in sight like unto an emerald. So the throne of God, there's the imagery there again. The idea of the rainbow is around his throne. Again, Revelation is a book of imagery, but to me it's interesting that something he used to make a promise to mankind is then represented in his throne room, at least as recorded by John in describing the Revelation. Revelation chapter 4, verse 3. All right, we're going to read now.
One other thing, I don't really, it's more of a question, I guess. I don't really have a comment on it, but I don't know if you had anything additional to it in verse 15, and then again in 16, and again in 17, where God's saying this covenant is between man and every living creature. Mm-hmm. Have you seen anything more about that, how that involves the animal world? I don't know what to make of that.
The only thing I can think of, and this is top of the head, so it's probably wrong. So the punishment that was exacted out because of the sin of man was carried out on every air-breathing creature. And so God probably is saying this token, this rainbow, yes, it's for man and for his sin, but it affected the animal kingdom. So it's a covenant with them. You're not getting destroyed either. And again, we're going to read some stuff in the last part of here that the idea of it's a biblical concept to say every man is going to stand and fall on their own accord before God. You're responsible for your own actions. However, there are things that happen around us that can influence our lives in a negative way. The animals had nothing to do with the sin outside of the serpent, right? They all got killed because something a man did. We're going to read about this account here of what happened to Noah with his sons. Ham did something wrong. It specifically mentions his children are going to bear the punishment for it. I'm not going to make sure this is very clear. We're not talking about the idea of inherited sin, that that my dad sins and I bear the punishment for it. And even use the term in God's eyes. I'm not going to involve an eternal punishment for something my father did. Can I very well bear the consequences of my father's sin? Yes, I can. Again, I always go back to the example of alcohol again because it's easy. If my father is a drunk and he spent all my inheritance being a drunk, burned through everything, am I going to bear that burden starting off with nothing in this life? Yes, I am. Am I going to bear that burden maybe with reputation in the community? Oh, here come Chris's son of a drunk, probably going to be a drunk too. Yes, you are. But again, as far as sin before God, Does my soul bear the burden for my father being a drunk? This hypothetical example, no, it does not. No, it does not. And I think that's what we're going to see some here in a loose sense in that way. The animal bore a punishment for something that they didn't do. They didn't have anything. So again, the token is to mankind primarily, secondarily to the animal world too. Like, yeah, you're not getting killed either. Not for this anyway. Only to be eaten by man. So like, being an animal is rough. Take the short end of the stick, that's for sure. But thanks for the question. Yeah, we'll read the last rest of the chapter now, 18th into the chapter. And the sons of Noah that went forth of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Again, we talked about age of this early on. Ham's the youngest, Japheth's the oldest, Shem is the middle one, but Shem is mentioned first, again, more than likely because that's the lineage of Christ coming through him. And these are the three sons of Noah. I'm sorry, in the verse 18 it says that Ham is the father of Canaan. 19, these are the three sons of Noah, and of them was a whole earth overspread. And Noah began to be a husbandman and planted a vineyard. And he drank of the wine and was drunken and was uncovered within his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brethren without. And Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it upon their shoulders, and went backwards and covered the nakedness of their father. And their faces were backward, and they saw not their father's nakedness. And Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his younger or youngest son had done unto him. And he said, Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren. And he said, Blessed be the Lord God of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. God shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. And Noah lived after the flood 350 years, and all the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. This section of Scripture, to me, goes to the authenticity of Scripture. The Bible doesn't sugarcoat anything. Noah, no doubt, is a hero of the Bible, one of the most well-known characters of the Bible. If you ask anybody out on the street to name some people in the Bible they might have heard of, more than likely you're going to get a Noah in there. That's, again, the idea of the rainbow, the idea of the worldwide flood, the ark. It's all common things you see out in, religious, quote-unquote, world, right? It's out there, right? So what does Noah do as soon as he gets off the ark? Plants a vineyard, harvest some grapes, make some wine. Again, we're going to talk about this some more, but the Bible uses the word wine. Context determines whether or not it's intoxicating wine or unintoxicating wine. And the same word is used for both. Same word is used for the juice of the grape. So we've got to be careful. Context is pretty easy here. What are we talking about? Intoxicating or non-intoxicating? Intoxicating. So the first thing Noah does as he comes off the ark, he plants a vineyard, harvests some grapes, makes some wine, and gets drunk. Now, why would I say that adds to the authenticity of the Bible?
It goes ahead and shows not everything is just rosy, I guess you would say, with Noah.
It shows the good and the bad.
Yep.
If man was writing this as a novel, do the heroes of man-written books usually have flaws with them? Not usually. They're usually put up as superheroes, as perfect things, right? Typically. But here, you think about your heroes of the Bible. You see Noah. Noah sinned. He got drunk. You see David and Bathsheba. Again, the pinnacles, the patriarchs, the leaders of the Bible points out their sins. It doesn't sugarcoat them. It says, they did stuff that was wrong. Now again, with David, we know men forget God's own heart, but it shows the good with the bad. It shows they repented, they show they did what's right. Here, an account is being made so we can learn something about his kids. Not so much about Noah. It shows us something about Noah. He has the weaknesses that all men have, right? But it's going to use this example of the story to show us something about his kids. So again, just be aware of that. I can't read my writing very good on my book. Oh, in verse 18, it's again something interesting to me. It says, and the sons of Noah that went forth out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Why do you think it put that phrase in there, that went forth out of the ark? What was that imply? He had more. And he lived another 350 years. So he had more kids. He had more sons, probably, that were not recorded. But again, the story revolves around Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So as they go out and we read about what Noah does, when he plants a vineyard and becomes drunk, and then his son, it says that he was uncovered in his tent. Basically, it's a euphemism. It means he passed out without his clothes on. Just to unsugarcoat it, that's what it meant. I want you to consider a couple of verses. We could read a lot of verses about drunkenness. We'll just only look at a couple. Turn to Proverbs chapter 20, verse 1. Proverbs chapter 20, verse 1. It says, "Wine is a mocker, strong drink is raging, and whoever is deceived thereby is not wise." That describes Noah right here. Right now, if you're passed out without any clothes on in the door of your tent there, you're not going to go by and say, "Look at that wise man over there." You're going to go by and look at that fool. The other one I want you to look at, 1 Corinthians 10, verse 12. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 12. It's a warning. It says, "Wherefore let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall." Because Noah was just pointed out as being righteous in his generation. So righteous he was the only one picked to survive this flood with his family. And as soon as he comes out the gate on the other side of it, boom, he messes up. It doesn't tell us that Noah had pride in that, but again, just the idea of warning, watch for pride creeping up in your life because it can lead to an embarrassing downfall. So Noah's passed out. Ham, his youngest, sees him. And it says in verse 22, the way it reads, it says, "And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of the father and told it to his two brethren without." Can you just read that? It's like, it doesn't come across as something necessarily wrong. You see something happening, I'm going to tell my brother. Again, and this is according to Jerry's notes here, where it says that he saw his father. He said that language there can literally read to gaze with satisfaction. And again, when I read that, I was like, that seems strange. It's a strange way of putting it, right? Gaze with satisfaction. Think about it like this. Maybe Ham saw his father getting drunk. Maybe Ham even tried to address it with his father. And so later on that day, he sees his father passed out without his clothes on. And he sits over there going, "It's exactly what you deserve." Now, that's one thing to think that. But then he goes and finds the only two people existing of consequence, right? His brothers, and goes, "Come look at Dad." Well, how does the Bible tell us to handle sin between brethren? You see your brother sin, you don't go tell 2 or 3 others to start off with, so they know about it and can take some satisfaction out of what you've done wrong. Because you go to your brother by yourself. You try to address it with them by yourself. Hopefully you gain your brother one-on-one at that point, and no one else has to know about it. The Bible does give us authority then, though, if they won't hear you, you go and tell 2 or 3 more. You try to keep the circle of knowledge, to use an expression, very small, to try to reclaim a brother. If they won't hear 2 or 3 more, it says you tell it to the church at that point. Now, mankind always gets it wrong. If someone does something wrong, or they hear someone does something wrong, they tell everybody they know before they go talk to that person. Matter of fact, sometimes they'll adamantly refuse to go talk to that person, but they will still talk about it freely with everybody else. That is wrong. That is sinful. That will be judged. Do not do that. So Ham goes and tells his brethren, "Look at our dad. Look at what he's doing." The so-called righteous in his generation. What do his brothers, other sons do? Ham's brothers, Noah's other sons. How they managed to pull this off, I don't know. But they lay a garment between their shoulders and walk into the place wherever Noah was backwards and cover him up. So they won't see him, and so nobody else will see him. Now, even more inexplicably, when Noah wakes up, it says he realized what Ham had done. How he knew that coming out of a drunken stupor, waking up with a garment, over you, how he deduced this is what Ham did and this is what my other sons did, I have no idea. Again, that's something that is not answered. I don't know how he would know that.
Well, somebody may have told him, because he says he awoke from his wine and knew, he came to knowledge.
He came to know. That would be a better way of putting it. The way it reads in King James, it's like he woke up when he knew. Well, how do you know? I guess it makes much more sense that he came to know. Maybe his wife saw what happened and said, "This is what your boys did." You probably heard that a lot if you have brothers. This is what your boys did while you were off doing this, right? So he came to know makes much more sense. Is Noah happy? Now again, Noah's in the wrong, obviously, but is Noah happy with what Ham did? No, he is not. And that's what's going to be the rest of this chapter here, is Noah making a pronouncement against Ham and to his children as a punishment for what he did right here. In verse 24, we're going to reread it. It says, Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his younger son had done unto him. And here he goes in verse 25, and said, "Cursed be Canaan." Now again, what's unique about that? Does he say, "Cursed be Ham"? Who does he go right to? Ham's kids, his offspring. "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brothers." I want to make clear again, God does not hold the son responsible for the sins that the father commits. Spiritually speaking, you're not going to roll into the judgment seat of God and God's going to say, "Hey, your dad did this, this, and this, therefore you're not getting in." That's not how it works. And we're going to read some verses here in Ezekiel 18. We're going to read a few verses to talk about that. Actually, the whole chapter of Ezekiel 18 explains that in detail. We're just going to read Ezekiel 18:20 here in a little bit. But again, the consequences of sin can go on for generation, for generation, for generation. Right? Think about Adam and Eve. We're talking about the patriarchal time when God is talking to the heads of the household. And then they took that to their children, that information. What happened with every other offspring from Adam and Eve outside of Noah? Somewhere along the line didn't pass the information down. Someone didn't do their job. Therefore, they lived their life with no knowledge of God and suffered the punishment for it. So there is consequences to sins that we might experience because of our parents, because of our grandparents. That's real. You can look all around you, you see people who are in horrible situations on this earth. Maybe homeless, maybe whatever it might be, because of decisions their parents made. Does that have anything to do with their standing before God?
And the individual can, because it's not spiritually binding eternally, that does not mean that you have to travel that path.
That's right.
But that's where a lot of times when we, one may consider, and someone will not want to change because that's the way grandma, mama, whoever did certain things. Maybe they weren't doing things right, but then how wrong is it for you to follow, knowing correctly, but now you're just going to, instead of just the consequences rolling down individually to you, now you're going to choose to follow that path versus right. And what is the desire there? Is the desire, what place are you going to be in with them that's going to be okay?
Right.
Yeah, sorry, that's a little long.
No, that's fine. I was looking at the time, we're almost done, so we're going to wrap this up quickly here. But again, it's the idea of this. I told you about my friend I had in college, right? The guy that I was good friends with, wasn't a member of the church, but he didn't drink. He didn't drink because his father was an alcoholic. And what he had seen his father do to his family. So he didn't want to have anything to do with alcohol. Now, what I didn't tell you when I told you that story is later on in life, I touch base with him every once in a while. He told me here, this has been like 5 years ago, he told me that he was out somewhere and he started drinking. I was like, what? He goes, yeah, someone just offered to me as whatever party he was at, and he said, yeah, I have a beer here and there, whatever. Again, the same mindset like his father surely had is I can have a drink here or there and I can control it. After seeing all that he saw, after abstaining for alcohol through the trial years of college and all that stuff, you start drinking at 35, 40 because you think you can control it now. It's like, that's, again, blind as a mocker. That's what Satan wants you to think. You can control it. This is not going to get to me. And that's all he wants. Satan just wants a chance. Give me a chance.
And even in just saying that, I can control it, is the recognition that it is something that has the potential to
To
be
be
out of control.
uncontrollable, right? Yeah.
And yet I'm going to do it. I'm going to step off into it.
Right. Like I said, again, the idea that we're trying to get across here is, the son not responsible for the sins of his father. Read Ezekiel 18, and I'm going to read one verse, Ezekiel 18:20. It says, "The soul that sinneth, it shall die. The son shall not bear the iniquity of the father, neither the father bear the iniquity of the son. The righteousness of the righteous shall be upon him, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be upon him." Again, consequences of sin, yes, they can get passed down. Punishment for that sin eternally? No, that does not get passed down. There is no inherited sin, there's no original sin, none of that is true. The punishment that Ham and his descendants had to face was they were going to be the servants of the descendants of Shem and Japheth. Because just by the name of Ham's son that's mentioned, Canaan, who does Ham's descendants become? Canaanites, right? That's who they became. Who did God finally send his people in to destroy? The time of Joshua. The Canaanites. They went and they destroyed them all, which is what they were supposed to do, but they didn't follow through, which is the case with man, and they left some. But what did they do with the ones that were left? And this is under Solomon's reign. Solomon did something with the ones that were left. He made them servants. He taxed them heavily. All that stuff that Noah pronounced on Ham's descendants rolled through for all of those years. Because, again, the consequence of sin, you're going to bear it. Now, could the Gentiles have become proselytes? Yes, they could have. Were some of the most prominent, you think of Paul, and what he did when he went to go preach. Who did he go preach to? Those outside of Judaism, those, again, trying to get those back, the descendants potentially of Ham on the outside, were given a path back in. So again, just want to make it very, very clear. Consequence of the sin, yes. The actual sin itself.
Whatever case we find ourselves in this life, we are to still live for God and the condition, that we have. And His word can be followed in any situation that we're in.
Correct.
There's nothing that's going to be
There's no
wrong.
excuse.
That's right.
No excuse. And the final few things I'll mention, it says in verse 27 back in chapter 9, it says, "God shall enlarge Japheth, and he should dwell in the tents of Shem." The idea, again, Shem was going to be the primary one receiving the blessings, but part of Japheth's blessing was he could dwell in the tents of Shem. The idea of fellowship, the idea of receiving blessings of proximity, because he had done something that was right, he was going to receive those blessings. And then the final thing is Noah lived up to the flood 350 years, and all the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. We talked about that timeline last week. Guess what Noah got to see before he died? What made another major biblical event? Everybody got a guess? He saw the Tower of Babel. He was alive when that happened. So he saw mankind not doing, again, what God had told them, be fruitful, multiply, and replenish, or fill the earth. They tried to be concentrated, stay in one area, and God said, you know what? Let's go down and just mix up some languages. So Noah was present. And again, since the people were concentrated in a given area, probably saw that event as well. So again, something interesting.